start, I just want to point out that hopefully what you'll see as we go through this is, at our core, we're all the same in what we do, our core mission. But having said that, we all respond differently to our own unique community needs. And I think you'll see that come out. And I'd also like to point out that we do collaborate. It looks different every time, different capacities. On one extreme, the Loveland Housing Authority actually helped create Estes Park Housing Authority 30 years ago. Our partnership with Housing Catalyst is a little bit different, and everything in between. But having said that, I'll just dive right in. And so I wanted to take a minute and just talk about what is affordable housing. And I apologize for the eye chart. We have pictures a little bit later. It'll be a little more exciting. Strictly speaking, the HUD definition, which has been around since 1937, is that a household should not pay more than 30% of their income towards housing. Once that is exceeded, then other things start not happening for that household. And so, for example, I won't go through each one of these, but in Larimer County, the area median income for a family of two is about $77,000. Per HUD's definition, they'd have to have housing costs of about $1,900 to meet that. Down at the bottom, another extreme, maybe a family of one that is retired, collecting $1,200 a month on Social Security. It's a whole lot more difficult to meet that need. They're at, I can't read my own chart, about $560 a month. But the last 5, 7, 8 years, I can't really quantify a timeline, and I think we're all aware that the need has grown and the definitions have changed. There's a lot of different definitions of affordable housing out there. I thought I would mention those. We don't necessarily work to meet these all the time, but they're out there just the same. And for a realtor, what affordable means to them is that there's inventory available for whatever their buyer happens to qualify for. It might be lower income, it might be $1 million home, but typically that's what affordability means for them. A business owner, at least in Loveland, what we find out is they simply want workforce housing. They need housing for their employees. A community activist traditionally is interested in homeless housing. A parent, and we hear this frequently, wants their grown kids and sometimes grandkids out of the house and on their own, living in the same zip code. And a politician, of course, recognizes the need for housing for everybody.
So I would say maybe politician for me, just to let you know that kind of, I don't resonate with that. I think elected leader, elected official, because I feel like once we're in office, we're focusing on serving our residents. So I kind of feel like maybe elected leader or official might be.
Happy to change that.
Yeah, just because I think that we're all kind of here, serving our community. So
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy to change that, thanks. And so who does affordable housing serve? In one way or another, it serves everybody. These photos happen to be of Loveland Housing Authority residents, but all demographics represented, young families, seniors, kids, everything in between. And so our mission statement, which is not radically different than the other agencies with me here today, is to provide low and moderate income residents with opportunities for home and community through affordable housing. And if you think about the continuum of housing, on one end, you have a homeless individual, maybe living in a shelter, working their way up through transitional housing, ideally moving into permanent supportive housing. Then the next step would be affordable rental housing, which is that dark green box in the middle and is really the core of what all three of us do. Once somebody moves on from there, it's into affordable home ownership or even market rate rental or home ownership. But we're going to talk about working outside of that box today, but I think it's safe to say for all of us, we recognize that 30 to 60% rental product is what our missions really are. And just a snapshot of our waitlist demographics right now. We've got about 4,000 households on our waitlist. Traditionally, elderly seniors make up a fourth to a third, disabled about a fourth, and families with children generally half or a little bit more. When you look at the area median income demographics, it's pretty intuitive. The lower the AMI level, the more demand that we see. The race analysis, we're pretty much a snapshot of Loveland, both who's living with us and who's on our wait list. What is not the same is when we look at gender. Instead of about a 50-50 split, like you would expect, about 3/4 of our applicants are female head of households. And so how we address the need in Loveland, of course, first and foremost is we own and manage about 1,000 affordable housing units right now. We also act as our own real estate developer. We do that for a number of reasons. One, it gives us a little more flexibility to build the products that we think we need. We get to control what it looks like. We can think about serving ourselves, really. We intend to hold all of our properties in perpetuity 50, 75 years from now. It still needs to be working. And of course, we get to reinvest the developer fee into the next development, which is important, instead of it going to a developer. We lead the Loveland Affordable Housing Task Force. This is really something that evolved out of the need that I touched on earlier. How do we serve all those different definitions? How do we, and in some cases we don't. And what we've done is assemble this task force full of our peers in the affordable industry, but as well as private developers, as well as city officials, city staff, interested public. And what's coming out of that are different ideas, like code changes, like different funding mechanisms to enable not just the housing authority, but non-traditional affordable developers that are interested, the for-profit segment. Density is always a hot topic, and we're figuring out ways to do that make sense for Loveland. We run a Section 8 voucher program, which is incredibly important. We have about 575 vouchers right now. And the significance of that program is that they convert a market rate unit to affordable as long as the landlord is willing to work with the program. We also have 10 VASH units that serve homeless veterans at the edge, 9 specialized state vouchers that serve homeless youth aged 18 to 23. And we're really excited. We're working with Archdiocesan Housing on the St. Valentine Apartment project. We were a special limited partner to enable that development, but we're also going to manage their 52 vouchers when they come online this fall. We run the Larimer Home Improvement Program, which is intended to help income qualifying homeowners accomplish significant renovations, maybe a roof, maybe a furnace, maybe all of that and more. Aspire, I'll keep this short, but it's pretty exciting. It's a nonprofit 501c3 under the Loveland Housing Authority, designed to provide navigation services to our residents. The best way I can put it is the proverbial hand up. We get in, help families identify what hurdles, obstacles they might have, and get them connected with the right resources. And then the last bullet, I just want to mention that these programs are over, but in the past, we've responded to community needs, and this is just an example. We managed disaster recovery programs for the state of Colorado after the 2013 floods and fires. They went on for years after that, but rental assistance, home repair, and in partnership with Larimer County Engineering, we also rebuilt 18 roads and bridges up and down the canyons that had washed out. So just an example of how we react to community needs, a little outside of that core mission.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, Jeff, around the vouchers. With the idea of converting market rate to affordable, do you have trouble finding market rate or landlords that will take the vouchers? Do you struggle with that at all?
Yes.
Okay, 'cause that
And
seems pretty typical.
And our
I think.
biggest challenge right now is the fair market rents are established by HUD every year.
Okay.
And right now, market rate is higher than the fair market rents. HUD's closing that gap a little bit, but that's been our biggest challenge.
Okay, yeah, and do you have someone, you talked about someone that you have that's the navigation services. Do you have anybody who does kind of that landlord outreach or helps with any of that kind of work?
Our Section 8 program managers do
Okay.
that outreach.
Okay, thank you. Anything we can do to help HUD figure that out? I mean, should we talk to, have you
Well, it's
been talking
based
to our
on data.
legislators? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's math. It's all by formula.
It sounds like it might be faulty math if it's not working for our residents.
Well, we would agree.
Okay,
Yep. Yep. And there are provisions, collectively, our boards can override that by up to 10%,
Oh,
which they do
okay.
every year.
Okay,
The last couple of years, it just hasn't been enough.
gotcha. Thank you.
So,
I'm sorry, I just hate to pause you. Commissioner Kafals also would like to ask a question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. I have a few questions. I'll wait till the end of your presentation, but I did want to follow up on one of your responses to Commissioner Stevens. I think you mentioned HUD is closing the gap in terms of fair market rents and what the allowable housing voucher payments are. Could you be more specific? What are they actually doing, and how will that
well,
help?
again, it's just formula, and maybe I'm giving HUD too much credit when I say that.
They could probably use whatever credit we can offer them. No, sorry, forgive me, but I'd be curious, what exactly do you mean? Are they allowing, because I seem to recall in the old days, you could, whatever the bedroom size is, there was a certain dollar amount that would go towards the voucher to supplement to make the 30% AMI, or 30% of one's income to make it affordable, but that you could go over a certain amount of that, or maybe it was the bedroom size. I'd like more explanation of that.
And we are allowed to go 10% over,
10% over.
which our board approves
So
every year.
finally, forgive me, I don't mean to belabor this, but is HUD increasing what they view as the fair market rent so that ultimately we could be more competitive as far as the use of housing vouchers?
They have gone up, but again, it's math. Every year, they're
It does
reset,
go up.
and
Okay.
it's based on market rents.
Okay, thank you.
So they've gone up, I would say, just not fast enough.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks,
Better.
Jeff.
Thank you. Proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get a little bit easier on the eyes here. I've got slides with pictures. And really, what I want to do is just highlight the quality of the housing that we build and manage. We take our responsibility seriously when it comes to the quality of our housing, not just for our residents that deserve a quality place to call home, but the rest of the community that drives by every day. And it starts with good architecture, good construction, and then, of course, good management and good maintenance. So some more examples. Proud to say the top right, top left are some of our oldest properties. You definitely don't know it when you drive by. Our Miracel Senior Living Campus, which is mostly affordable, but there's a market rate component to that as well. And then on that campus, again, working a little bit outside of the box, we've got our Greenhouse Homes Skilled Nursing Facility, which was built in response first to our residents reaching out, saying, hey, where do we go when we need skilled nursing? We don't want to leave the Miracel campus. We commissioned a study, said we needed skilled nursing, not assisted living like we thought. And we ended up building 9 10-bedroom homes that are skilled nursing facility that we're very proud of, and all Medicaid approved.
Yeah, it's, I've heard those before, and I know there were a couple under construction. They are quite remarkable, and, yeah, it's a really nice system that's there. And I think they started building some similar, but not the same, in Longmont, near the Hover Manor system, because my
Yep.
mother lives in that system, so.
And
yeah.
they're just as nice. They're
Yeah,
Beautiful. The key difference is, in Longmont, they're all market rate.
Yeah.
And we're all Medicaid approved.
Yeah, and that's the big difference,
And
yeah.
the significance of that, I'll say, at the time, 10, 12 years ago now, those were the first new Medicaid beds in Larimer County in something like 50 years,
Yeah.
because there isn't enough funding at the state
Yeah.
level.
And I think that's what makes it so unique and special, so thank you.
Thank you. And then some recently completed projects. Again, bottom right is actually our Meadows, which is our oldest tax credit development, 1995. And I'm really proud that it looks as good or better today than the day we built it. Place to call home. Okay, so looking ahead, the good news in Loveland is that we have been able to assemble a pipeline that is probably 10 to 15 years long right now. We have the opportunity to build over 1,000 apartments and 220 single-family home lots, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I say fortunate because we've been able to accumulate enough land and almost enough raw water rights to do that. The throttle is really funding. It starts with the availability of low-income housing tax credits, which are competitive. Where you all could help with that is at the federal level. If we had more credits flowing to each of the states, and obviously to Colorado that we could compete for, that would be a huge step forward. However, beyond that, that typically brings in 50 to 65% of the equity that we need, and then we end up with a gap of roughly $8 million that we have to start working to fill with usually help from the state, City of Loveland in our case, fee waivers. But when we get down to the end, it's our own reinvestment sometimes, and then we end up with a traditional mortgage. But that gap is always difficult. So I won't go through all these in the interest of time, but a mix of multifamily, a couple of senior projects, and one thing I'm really proud of is recently, and I don't have a picture of it, but we had some success working with donated land that was donated by Grace Community Church to Loveland Habitat. They reached out to us, they're builders, not developers, could we help? And the short story is we were able to turn that into 47 single-family home lots for Habitat, which in Loveland is enough to keep them going for 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, it's a great development. I've done many years going to Women Build and doing other volunteer work for Habitat. It's a really nice neighborhood, and it's very, I mean, it's tucked back there, it's very beautiful and stuff, so it's a really great project.
And what we got out of the deal is we have enough land that we'll be able to build 120 of our apartments on there. It's Songbird Heights on here. We'll build that in 2 phases. So I'll just go through these quickly. These are just the projects that we have coming up. Most are somewhere in the design and entitlement process. Edge Phase 3, we just applied for tax credits. Hopefully we're breaking ground next year. It'll round out that project. Songbird Heights I just mentioned, nestled up against the hill in the front of Grace. Crossroads is another really exciting opportunity, really because of the success with the Grace project. Crossroads Church in town reached out. They couldn't donate their land, but they had 52 acres that they were willing to sell at a discount. We were able to buy at about $2.5 million below market with the assistance of TAG funding from the state. And what's really exciting about this, and to be clear, we're just now starting to take it through entitlement in that process. But in the end, it's going to be Grace times about 3. We'll have room for about 180 of our affordable apartments, But on the home ownership side, Habitat will be back with about 35 more lots. They'll serve 35 to probably 80% AMI with their model. There'll be a second builder, Impact Development Builders, that will build 80 to 120% AMI using deed restrictions and subsidies, and they're willing to deed restrict. So they'll be able to hit that AMI level, but build a little bit bigger, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms if needed for a family. And then we have Mission Homes, who is a private developer that's done an extremely good job of hitting 80 to 120% AMI by building small lots. And so we will have, when we're done, about 180 single-family home lots, providing ownership opportunities, 35 to 120% AMI. Pretty daunting. At some point, I may be asking for help for that, a little outside of the box. Not sure what that'll look like. Calamos is a senior project we're working on, a small home community. Could talk a long time on this. I'll keep it simple. The concept was invented by Dr. Bill Thomas, the same person that invented the greenhouse homes. Pretty exciting. And we're involved because they agreed that for this project in Loveland, they're willing to incorporate an affordability component for 50% of the units. So a market rate type product available to lower income seniors. This is an 8-acre site that we own, conveniently located next to our Meadows Apartments. Vandy Water is an interesting story. A local developer in town reached out. This was a little bit of a remnant parcel that they had a little trouble selling it. Last fall, they donated it to us, and with the understanding that we have 10 years to build it out as affordable. And then that kind of opened the door to a couple other, and I'll just call these opportunities right now, but collectively, everybody up here for the last 5-6 years have been sometimes responding, sometimes to our city council and others. How do we get private developers more involved? And then when we've had the opportunities, we challenge them to do the same. And so when McWinney donated the Vandy Water site, that opened the door to say, well, what's next? And right now, they're in the design phase of their Centerra South project, which has been controversial because of the funding mechanism they're using. But it's opened the door to say, hey, let us in up front. If you're serious about affordability, our residents deserve to be thought of on the front end, not on the back end on a parcel that was unsellable. And so they've agreed. In fact, this morning I'm coming from a meeting, and they've thrown down the gauntlet. They want 20% affordable units in that subdivision. I don't know that we're going to be able to develop it with our current funding stream, unless they can extend the timeline. But point being, at this point, all we have is a letter of intent on both sides, but the opportunity is there. And that, in turn, opened the door with a second developer that got wind of this, Black Timber, building I think it's about a 200-acre subdivision on the north side of Loveland. But they said, hey, we think we'd like to do something similar. And so we're talking to them about 2 different lots, getting in early. And again, all we have is a letter of intent. But I'm excited that we're starting to get the interest of the private developers in trying to get creative. Historically, we haven't been able to work together because our business models are so different. Not that we're good and they're bad or vice versa. It just, when we create partnerships together, development partnerships, it's difficult. But if they can help us get land at a discount or a better price of zero, now they're enabling us. And then when we get to be in the front end and design, it's just better for everybody. Woo, okay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you. And that was a great presentation, so we'll go ahead and move on because I know we're kind of time restricted. So Leah, did you want to say anything about that, or how are we on time?
If you'd like to ask Jeff some questions about what he just presented on, I think this is a good time to pause
Okay.
for that, and then we'll move forward
Okay.
to Estes.
So Commissioner Capalas, I saw your hand was raised.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Very, very informative, and all of the slides that we received and had a chance to review were really helpful. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I'll try to be succinct. Going back to your beginning of your presentation regarding housing definitions, you talked about the classic HUD definition, of course, 30% of a household's gross income. Has there been any discussion about changing that definition or adjusting that definition, or we're still going to go based on a definition that was established before I was born?
1937. As far as I'm aware, there are no discussions at HUD about changing that.
Okay, and related to that, if I may, just have a couple here, I'll try to move it along. We often hear the term attainable housing. Is that just a more recent, the last number of years, a term of art, or what does attainable housing mean in terms of all that we can all agree upon? Is it more in the workforce housing realm? What is attainable housing?
Truthfully, I don't know, and that's,
Okay.
I assume I'm talking for my peers up here, but my point with that one slide is there's a lot of definitions out there right now.
Okay.
And to me, I think what attainable means is that entry-level home ownership.
Oh.
But that's,
Fine.
don't run with that.
No, that's fine.
That's my own.
And perhaps the others can speak to that if they wish. Moving right
And
along.
let me just clarify, that term was not invented by the affordable housing community.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of aware of that, but thank you for expressing your thoughts on that particular term. May I continue?
Yes, please, Commissioner.
So I'm curious, when you mentioned wait list demographics, and it seemed like race analysis, you recognizing that race is kind of a somewhat artificial construct, but that's another discussion. You seem to combine white people with Latinx or Latino people. Why, and isn't it valuable to break that out?
It would be. Truthfully, we're constrained by our database right now.
Okay.
Which we're changing to a different platform.
Okay, thank you. I certainly can appreciate that. Gender analysis, 73% female head of household, 27% male head of household. Does that mean that these are single-parent households, 73% by a female and 27% by male?
Sometimes,
Sometimes. Okay.
that's difficult to answer. We don't measure that, but anecdotally, I would say mostly single females and female single parents.
Okay, I'm almost there. I thought it would be better to wait to the end, but maybe not. Going on to the next, I think Commissioner Stevens I appreciate that she raised the questions about the landlord relationships, and maybe you guys could talk about how you're working on that to try to get people to understand there's some value in partnering with the public sector for housing vouchers. The Affordable Housing Task Force, I think you did cite representation, peers, private developers, and you may have used the term interested community members, something like that. Are there people with, quote, lived experience or people who are directly impacted as part of this Affordable Housing Task Force?
There have been.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just asking
Yeah.
questions. It's all good.
Yep.
The Larimer Home Improvement Program, that's something near and dear to us. Could you say briefly, Jeff, what are the gaps in terms of resources and what is the utilization these days? Who are we helping with the Larimer Home Improvement Program and what are the gaps and what is the utilization?
So all of the funding that we receive goes back out. Some comes from Loveland, some comes from
county.
the county, some from Fort Collins, some from the state. And depending on the source defines where that funding can be used. And I would say it's fair to say, I hate to have my hand out all the time, we could always use more. And especially our emergency home repair component of that program. We run out of funding fairly quickly. The county, mobile homes is good. Not all of our, or not as good as in need. Not all of our funding can be used to fund mobile home repairs.
Okay.
I don't know if I really answered your question, but,
Well, no,
but we're able to utilize all of the funding that we receive.
That, yes, thank you, and perhaps a follow-up for Alea might be, maybe we can get more specific breakout of, utilization and, more specific funding gaps. I don't know whether the county can put more money into this, but I think that's something we should at least think about.
I can absolutely follow up with that, and that's something we've already put together for this
That's what I
next
thought.
budget session.
Thank you. My last question, thanks. Affordable housing development projects, next 10 to 15 years. Of all the really exciting projects that you listed, I seem to recall you were working on some kind of a cottage home, smaller square footage
Yes.
project. Is that included in the list that you
So
gave?
that's in the Calamos project.
Oh, that's the Calamos project.
Yep.
And Mission Homes, is that the same nonprofit developer that built the community in, I think, at least in Berthoud, where they have smaller square footage homes and the landscaping is such that it reduces water bills and
Yep.
things?
And you're almost correct. It's the
Oh.
same builder, but they're for-profit.
Oh, that's right. Okay, thank you very much.
A mission-minded for-profit.
A good thing to be.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stevens, did you have any questions? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on. Thank you, Alea, and thank you for answering questions.
As we move forward, I just wanted to check in, since we started about 15 minutes late, is everyone okay with us going about 15 minutes over?
Colleagues, I know I have a hard stop at 11:30, so maybe 11:25 for me. Colleagues, did you have something?
11:30 was
It's 11, it's supposed to go to 11:30?
Correct.
Yeah, so.
It was scheduled till 11:30, but since we
Yeah.
started a little late, I just wanted to check in on that.
I have a hard stop at 11:30, but, and I would try to move that, but probably not. But if we go a little over, I'm sure it would be okay. So I apologize for that, so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, let's jump into Estes Park Housing Authority. Scott Moulton, take it away.
Well, good morning, and thanks again for having us. So as Director Finnis already covered, all three of our organizations largely have the same or very similar missions. I'll start with ours. In order to ensure a balanced and sustainable community, the Estes Park Housing Authority creates and facilitates housing opportunities and services for persons of low and moderate income. We'll tackle the elephant in the room right out of the gate, that the Estes Valley community passed a lodging tax extension in November of 2022, which will give us our first dedicated source of funding and greatly expand our mission in a few key aspects. Before I jump along in my presentation, I actually want to touch on a few things from the previous speaker, and I think it helps put a face on some of the items that Loveland Housing Authority has done and continues to do. One of those is the incredible work they did with the disaster recovery efforts in the flood. My wife, prior to us meeting each other and getting married, was a recipient of some funds to help with damage to our current home as part of the 2013 flood. So I like sharing that story, and that the effort that Loveland Housing Authority did impacted me directly and my family. We are governed by now a board of 7 trustees for the Estes Park Housing Authority. Those 7 are appointed by the Estes Park town trustees as well. We continue to strengthen that relationship with the town of Estes Park, particularly in light of ballot initiative 6E passing. As the others here at the table, we are a property manager of a much smaller quantity of units, only 209. But I highlight that those 209 units represent about 7% of Estes Park proper's population. So we certainly have an impactful relationship with our community in Estes Park. And if we extrapolate that a little bit further out to other deed-restricted inventory ownership and rental in the community, we touch directly nearly 11% of our population, of our year-round population. I like to say that the Estes Park Housing Authority is a teenager trying to get out of their own home and move into their own place of residence. And I mean that in relationship to the Loveland Housing Authority, who has been a tremendous support, helped stand up our organization, continues to be that significant support for us, and has helped us develop a number of properties in Estes. Our 2022 development called Peakview was our first development on our own. Prior to that, Loveland Housing Authority has helped us with all of our developments, or they developed assets that we now currently own. And they continue to be a very significant partner for us and will for the foreseeable future. I also want to point out that as I go through the slides, all of the pictures that you see that are embedded in my presentation are of our properties, both the internal pictures you see. This is actually Peakview, our newest development. I had some computer-generated models created to show what it would look like when it was being lived in. I mentioned that we have a strengthening relationship with the town of Estes Park. We recently executed on a new memorandum of understanding. I trip over that every time. To use funding generated by BOCC. So we executed that on July 11th, I believe it was, where the bulk of funds generated by BOCC will be funneled to the Housing Authority to execute on the missions wrapped up inside of that ballot language.
And I'd just like to pause there and just acknowledge and thank you for all the partnerships. The county is very proud to be a partner with 6E. As you know, our county staff and the town of Estes and you all and Visit Estes Park, we all, really collaborated to get that done. And it's very, really great and exciting progress, especially after the state legislature passed that legislation to allow that to go happen. So I think it's a very comprehensive and important partnership, and just really grateful to see that the voters passed that, and now we have this new pathway. So I appreciate all the work that you guys all did to have that. So now we have this opportunity. So thank you.
And thank you all for your involvement, and we're already in the planning stages, of course, for 2024, so you'll be hearing more from us in the short term on that. A brief timeline of sort of EPHA's evolution with the, again, wonderful assistance of Loveland Housing Authority. We were originally founded by town charter in 1993. I kind of call those first few handful of years our formational years. Our community saw a significant amount of building in the affordable space and in general in the late 1990s and early 2000s, as kind of you can see by this timeline. We do now own Lone Tree, which Loveland developed, 57 affordable units. They're also instrumental in rehabbing Cleve Street Apartments, which is 10 affordable units. Built Talents Point, which is a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit project as well. We do operate only 24 age-restricted 55 or older affordable rental units. It's called the Pines. That development was already in existence. We took it over, rehabbed 24 units, sold 23 off to help fund the remaining portion of that. We retained one in our ownership, which one of our staff members resides in, and then the rest is 24 rental units that are income restricted. 2006, you see we also developed 29 at the time deed restricted ownership units for 80% AMI or below, and then 30 market rate units. That is now a 28-31 split, as we lost one a number of years ago to foreclosure. Falcon Ridge was our most recent LIHTC project, brought 48 affordable units. A lesson learned in that development is we lost the opportunity for about 16 additional units that we were not able to build as sort of a concession to our community. And I certainly wish that we had those units now, but we lost that opportunity. And of course, the last few years have been quite active for us with the addition of Peakview, a workforce, non-income restricted development that we opened in 2021 in the midst of COVID. Brought 26, a little bit below market rate, but not restricted in any formal way. The only requirement being that at least one adult in the household must work within the school district boundaries 30 hours or more per week. And then, of course, lodging tax extension passed by the voters in 2022.
Can I pause you just there real quick? Can you, and maybe you already mentioned this and I didn't catch it, but the wildfire workforce condominiums, they think also have kind of a place in providing for folks. Do you have any partnerships or connections with the wildfire development?
The only formal relationship we have with the Westovers and Allnuts, which are the developers of that property, is from a compliance standpoint via our MOU with the town where we complete all the compliance work. I do speak with the developer quite frequently, so we are in contact quite often with them. And both of us, keep the door open to what the future of that project may hold in light of the cost escalation that they've realized along with the interest rate environment, which of course has made the mission of that segment of the development a little more difficult.
That's what, 88 condominiums in that unit?
Yes, planned 88 workforce restricted
Okay.
ownership opportunities,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. And I have gotten a tour. I think you remember that tour where I think Laura was there and we all took the trolleys and toured those apartments. Those were just beautiful. And which one is the one that's underdeveloped will have the childcare on site, or which one has the childcare that's being built on site?
The one that is currently being built by 4 Points Funding as a workforce development, 94 units, broke ground 4 months ago or so, has a building set aside that will have to be demolished for childcare on site. They were not able to make the funding work for that at the time they broke ground, but as soon as the community needs dictate that we need that new physical asset, I think the community is prepared to make that happen.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions.
Of course. So now we'll transition to what the future looks like for housing in Estes. And I believe all three of you had the opportunity a few weeks ago when I was running off my 3 hours of sleep, where we went through the needs assessment, the recent needs assessment that was completed in January of '23. This is just a couple slide decks from that presentation, which you had the opportunity to see. Our new headline number is that by 2030, we would need 2,720 homes for people. This is also a slide that comes directly from our new housing needs assessment and really the strategic planning portion of that, which was a step above and beyond what we've done with previous needs assessment. And I like to highlight this on the left-hand side, and really what it shows is this is where our needs sort of exist now in terms of demographic makeup by count. But really, what I like to highlight here is this can change over time based on our community's focus areas. If we focus on our schools, bring more childcare to bear, increase the availability of that childcare, the affordability, that in theory could impact the amount of homes we need for families with 2, 3, 4, 5 members of the family. So the needs assessment is somewhat static in the sense that as we pull different levers in our community, that will have an impact on what housing types and what affordability ranges that we need to focus on. On the right-hand side of this slide was a summary of the strategies that were laid out as part of our strategic plan. I sort of joke that the light blue there could just be all of these all the way straight down, bigging on them now, but the reality is that we are hamstringed by our capacity as an organization, as a community, so we can't focus on everything all at once. Moving forward, though, I mentioned that, well, maybe I haven't mentioned yet. One of the areas of our focus moving forward with 6E will be standing up programs that allow us ideally to preserve housing stock that already exists in our community. Estes has a unique situation in that we are not along the Front Range. We are somewhat of a resort, semi-rural community, and that comes with different and unique challenges when it comes to attainable, affordable workforce housing. So some of the programs I will hopefully be able to stand up over the next 8 to 12 months are focused on deed restrictions, enhancing our down payment assistance program in exchange for deed restrictions as well. And that some of those programs that are used in other states in the country, along with Colorado quite significantly in the Vail, Aspen areas, Crested Butte, allows us to purchase a deed restriction on an existing property, and in exchange for that public investment, we put an affordability or workforce restriction on that home. And those programs, I think, can be a significant tool in our toolbox, so to speak, as the value for that dollar is pretty substantial. Our last project was nearly $300,000 a door. If I can have the same impact on an existing piece of property for, say, $50, $70, even $100,000, that's an extreme value in my opinion. So programs of this nature will be some of the things that we look to stand up in Estes. Part of our expanded mission, of course, will be into seasonal workforce support, which is covered under that legislation. That's an area where our board has not chosen to focus on in the past, but we really have received that mandate to focus on that, and that will become part of the area that we engage in and try to support our seasonal workforce as well. And then, of course, accessory dwelling units, well, I don't anticipate these having a hugely significant impact on the availability of housing stock. As with everything in housing, and I think my colleagues at the table will agree to this, we need to employ every tool in the toolbox to have an impact. It doesn't just take one thing. And even if any individual program is relatively small in the material impact it has, it still plays an important role. And accessory dwelling units will play a part in that.
And are you guys, in your program, making kind of stipulation? I know probably I answer this, but I'm really worried about them not becoming short-term rentals. These are long-term rentals, and that's in the documents and things, just.
Any program that we stand up will have that stipulation, and it will really be covered in two ways. It'll have a new stipulation to that effect excluding or prohibiting use as an SDR. Also, it would largely be governed by the existing cap and residential zones.
Okay, thank you.
I'll touch on that briefly. A unique aspect for Estes is, of course, the short-term rental market. And I think going back to 2016, I think our community stepped up to the plate by implementing the cap and residential zones, which is then, of course, split between now the Estes Park planning area and inside of town limits. But that same cap number of 522 or 516, I always get the number confused, still exists. And I think that is largely governed the future impact of STRs in our community. Any future additional inventory that STRs or impact that those have will and can only happen in commercially zoned A or A1 or other commercial zoned areas. I say that to not mitigate the impact that it can still have on individual families. If someone is the holder of a STR license, but they're not using it, and they choose to use it at the future in some capacity, and thereby no longer renting on the long-term market, that of course would have an impact to that individual family. But in a holistic macro scale, I don't think that impact can become more severe than it has been. Transitioning to some of our anticipated development and rehab pipeline, obviously with the passage of 6E, that will give us a extremely strong tool to impact our development pipeline, our ability to land bank. So these are some of the projects that we're looking at here in the future. Lone Tree, I mentioned, developed by Loveland in the mid-90s, is about 27 years old at this point, and is in need of a rehab. Very proud of that property, the way it looks, the way it has maintained its livability for our residents, but it is in need of a rehab so it can keep going for another 30 years. I believe you all are familiar with the fish hatchery project. We currently still have the 2 million in ARPA funds dedicated to that development. We recently stepped back on that project in coordination with the town of Estes Park to sort of reconceptualize and ensure that that property and project properly serves the residents of our community and the income levels that they need to sustain them. Castle Ridge is a piece of property that we land banked in 2019, that we're in the early stages of pre-development work on. Currently, we are hopeful that property will lend itself to anywhere between 29 and 31 for ownership opportunities, serving anywhere from 80 to 140% AMI. I'm happy to say that we recently closed on July 14th on our first purchase using 6E funds. Technically, we haven't used 6E funds yet. I dipped into EPHA coffers to make this purchase happen, but we're hopeful that we can build up to 12 for purchase homes on this 2.62 acre site as well. And we're in communication with the town of Estes Park to use any land that they have, and we're discussing Stanley Ave as well as a potential joint venture with the town of Estes Park for a potential mixed-use daycare center, other light commercial with dwelling units on top as well. And with that, I'll end and answer any questions you might have.
Colleagues, any questions in the interest of time to make sure we have time for Housing Catalyst? Commissioner Stevens.
Mine will be quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. You showed Prop 123 as a potential funding. Has Estes Park opted in or decided to opt in?
We have decided to opt in. The
Okay.
town board gave us that direction a few weeks back, and we'll be, I think, submitting that application the tail end of this week or early next week.
Okay. How about Loveland
Still in discussion, but leaning towards yes.
and Fort Collins?
Fort Collins is in.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
I'll just ask one question, and thank you, Scott. How do you pronounce your last name?
Moulton.
Moulton, yes. The slide about the timeline, and you mentioned the Peak View workforce apartments, 26 or so, 2021. Can you say a little bit more about the demographics? Who's being served? Teachers, housekeepers? Could you speak to the demographics?
I can.
Thank you.
This is off the top of my head, but I have a pretty good handle on who resides there. So I'll start with, we've had 4 families move in and or move out that resulted in home ownership. So it provided that platform for them to land and then transition into home ownership in the valley. That's something I'm very proud of. We currently, I believe, going into the next school year, still house 3 teachers and or counselors. We house 3 different business owners in the Estes Valley. We house an executive director of a nonprofit, Estes Park Learning Place. What other questions might I be able to answer?
I think that's fine for now. Thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Scott. We should move on to hear from these folks.
Okay, I will hold my questions for later. So go ahead, proceed, please.
Well, Jeff gets it up. So good morning, Commissioners. I'm Kristen Fritz, and I'm the Chief Real Estate Officer for Housing Catalyst. And I'm here with Michelle Christensen, who is our Chief Operating Officer, and we are going to run through this presentation together. I will echo what both Jeff and Scott said, is that we have many similarities among us in terms of our core missions and what we do. And we have a strong collaboration and partnership culture amongst us. But we also have certain things that we do approach differently and have different tools and strategies that are unique to our communities and to best meeting the needs of our individual communities. So we decided to provide you kind of with a overview of our strategic plan at Housing Catalyst. But first, just to start, as we all did, with our kind of core mission and vision statement, which for Housing Catalyst is to create vibrant, sustainable communities throughout northern Colorado. So to achieve this mission, we are focused on maintaining the fiscal viability of our organization, achieving a social goal by providing affordable housing along with supportive services, and also with a focus on environmental sustainability. So Housing Catalyst is a mission-driven real estate developer at the leading edge of affordable housing, forging public-private partnerships to build and preserve affordable homes in northern Colorado. We are among the largest property managers in northern Colorado, where we own, manage, and have been instrumental in the creation of more than 1,600 local residences. We are a public housing agency that administers housing assistance programs for Fort Collins, Wellington, as well as Larimer County. We are overseen by a board of commissioners appointed by the city of Fort Collins, and the agency was formed in 1971 with a resolution by the Fort Collins City Council. So a little look at our history. I think we've heard about the 1937 Housing Act, a pivotal year in time and history for us in the affordable housing industry. And then in 1971 is when the Fort Collins Housing Authority was formed with resolution from the city of Fort Collins. We based our headquarters down just down the road at 1715 West Mountain in 1977. And then in 1995 is actually when the intergovernmental agreement that delegates the powers and duties for Larimer County Housing Authority to the Fort Collins Housing Authority with the authority to administer 35 vouchers, that was completed in 1995. In 2010, we did an organizational restructuring that really created the capacity for us to start doing our own real estate development. And in 2015 is when we opened Red Tail Ponds. That was the first permanent supportive housing community in northern Colorado. And then in 2016 is when we changed our name from Fort Collins Housing Authority to Housing Catalyst, but that did not change anything about who we are and what we do. And in 2021, we celebrated our 50 years of being in operations. So we have recently adopted a 5-year strategic plan. We thought this might be helpful as we know that the county is also looking at a strategic plan in terms of organizing the way that we do our work. So some of this is going to be really relevant to what we're talking about today, some of it a little bit less so I'll go quickly through some of these. So goal number 1 in our strategic plan is to provide affordable housing of the highest quality through effective property operations and asset management. So along the lines of what both Jeff and Scott mentioned, making sure that we manage the properties that we have in our portfolio successfully, both for our residents to have healthy, sustainable, quality standard of living, as well as to the greater community to make sure that what the greater community sees and experiences from the Housing Catalyst portfolio is quality and really works to diminish the stigma that goes along with affordable housing. So goal number 2 is really the core of the development focus. So increasing the supply of affordable housing. So this goal is really to strategically increase the supply of affordable housing through new development, preservation, acquisition, and partnerships. So our goal is really to make sure that we are best meeting the needs of the community for affordable housing. As has been stated, we really focus on affordable rental housing up to 60% of area median income. However, we do serve the spectrum. So permanent supportive housing has a focus on people experiencing homelessness. We have 2 permanent supportive housing communities in our portfolio, and our recently opened Oak 140 project serves up to 80% of AMI utilizing the new income averaging tool. However, the core of our portfolio is really that 30 to 60% of area median income with rental housing. So a snapshot of our portfolio. I think many of you are familiar and many of you have even seen most of these properties. Our recently opened projects, Oak 140 just down the street. This was a exciting project in the heart of downtown Fort Collins, utilizing income averaging, low-income housing tax credit project. Of course, the most critical tool to what we do, Mason Place. That is our second permanent supportive housing community with 60 units located in Midtown Fort Collins. Also a low-income housing tax credit project. our Village on Horsetooth project, which is also a tax credit development and also developed on the city's first land bank property, and also utilized the disaster recovery funds that were available at that time. All of the tools are needed, really, for all of these projects. We also maintain a very robust pipeline. This is a snapshot as to a few of those projects. So our Impala redevelopment, this is a project that actually just closed financing and started construction about 2 weeks ago. This is a development that was formerly public housing. Public housing is a program that has not been properly funded at the federal level for decades and decades, and we have been working to move away from the public housing program into the more sustainable funding tools that are now available to us, which is really the tax credit program. And the Impala development will actually utilize a site that had 11 single-family homes on it that were used as public housing that were really not able to be maintained up to the standards that we would like at Housing Catalyst, or that you see across our portfolio, because of the declining federal subsidy that goes into that program. And when anything is public housing, you cannot use any other funding sources to layer on top of it. So you really are dependent on those federal public housing dollars, and they are not adequate in terms of managing and maintaining. So we were able to redevelop that site into beautiful new housing that will be a total of 86 units right over by Poudre High School. And that will really have a family focus, lots of bigger units and a lot of amenities for families on that site. We also have a renovation project where a building that was formerly public housing, we are transitioning out of public housing straight into our villages portfolio, and we are renovating that project. Again, out of the public housing program, we're able to use local federal dollars and put that into a renovation project and really bring that building back to life. We also are pursuing the next phase of our Oak 140 project, which is the Remington parking lot site, to do our next large tax credit development. I will say, like I said, this is just a snapshot of the development that is currently in our pipeline. We have land under contract. We have land that is ready to be developed. We are all constrained by the amount of resources to develop the amount of units that are in our pipeline. It is certainly smart and strategic to maintain a very active pipeline because funding sources can come and go, and we want to be ready to use them. But all of us will be not only in competition with one another, but in competition with ourselves to develop the number of units that we have planned. We are restricted by the amount of low-income housing tax credits, by the private activity bond capacity, and by the local gap funding that is available at the city, county, state, federal levels. So goal number 3 is where I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. Goal number 3 is to increase housing opportunities for residents of Fort Collins and Larimer County, and we largely accomplish this through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. If you want to go to the next slide. Housing Catalyst administers roughly 1,600 vouchers, and out of those, 104 are Larimer County's vouchers. We have 39 of the Larimer County vouchers are what we would call regular vouchers, and 65 are what we call mainstream vouchers. And I would say we have been very aggressively pursuing all opportunities to increase the voucher program over the last 20 years. What we have seen is that those opportunities are typically through what we call special purpose vouchers. And those are vouchers that are targeting a specific subgroup of the population. Examples of those are the VASH program, which serves veterans, the Family Unification Program, Foster Youth to Independence, and the Mainstream Program, which is an odd name, but it is for people who are non-elderly and disabled. We administer Larimer County's vouchers along with our vouchers through the same rules and regulations that all our vouchers are administered through. And we tell all of our voucher holders are able to use their voucher throughout Larimer County. So it's not different if someone has a Larimer County voucher. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? A lot of those special purpose vouchers too rely on partnerships. So we have partnerships with the VA, Homeward Alliance, Department of Human Services. It takes a lot of coordination and services to help serve those very vulnerable populations. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this slide, I wanted to just illustrate, this is Housing Catalyst vouchers along with Loveland vouchers, and sort of shows you where the distribution throughout Larimer County is. Those are the hot spots of where we have the most vouchers. You'll see Greeley in there because we do administer the Veterans VASH vouchers. The VA, we're with the Cheyenne VA, and part of their catchment area is Greeley. So we do administer some vouchers in Greeley as well. And I also wanted to mention that in 2021, Housing Catalyst became a moving to work designated housing authority, which is it's a confusing name. It has nothing to do with working or moving. But it's a special designation that high-performing housing authorities can apply to and be selected for. It's a national competition. We were one of about 40 housing authorities in the landlord incentive cohort. So when you were asking about, what we're doing to try and attract more landlords, basically, if you have this designation, you are allowed certain waivers and opportunities to be creative under HUD. And so one of the things we will be looking at is signing bonuses for landlords who've not participated in the voucher program before. Vacancy payments, so if a landlord maybe has a voucher holder and they move out, oftentimes they want to fill that as quickly as possible, but sometimes with the voucher program, it takes a little bit of extra time. You have to do an inspection and things. So this would allow us to sort of pay so there's no gap for them if they're willing to take another voucher holder. We also partner with Homeward Alliance. They have a navigator that is working with anyone who's newly issued a voucher to help them do a search and kind of organize that, help to make that connection with available units. I think those are kind of all the things I wanted to highlight. In the interest of time, I think I'll circle back if you have questions. Goal number 4, enhance social and economic well-being for residents. And we do this through several different resident services programs. We have a Jump Start program, which is the HUD Family Self-Sufficiency Program, and that we've had funded for about 25 years. So we have 3 full-time social workers that work with voucher holders around goals towards financial literacy, health and wellness, education, and building community. Then we also have our resident services staff that work with our villages, affordable housing communities. Again, just there to help make those linkages to resources in the community. And of course, permanent supportive housing, which we're also very fortunate in that we receive a county behavioral health grant for a position, critical position, working with those very vulnerable residents. That's it. And we'll just mention, we won't go into these, but goal 5 is to achieve excellence in business operations. We are one of the only housing authorities that has a Standard & Poor's AA- rating. And goal number 6, build support for affordable housing. Do you want to talk about that, Kristen?
Yeah, so I think all of us are, as housing authorities, are uniquely positioned to be strong local advocates for affordable housing, and we all do everything we can to make ourselves available towards that effort. This is something that has been added to our strategic plan because we have recognized all of the various ways that we work on this. And I will note for Fort Collins, I have been a volunteer member of the city's Affordable Housing Board for the past 6 years. And as that term is expired, the city council did just adopt a I'm not sure what it would be, resolution, to ensure that Housing Catalyst maintains an ex officio position on that board because of the important relationship between the local housing authority and the local government. So we think that will be a great way to continue working on this goal, and really for the housing authority and the city to continue to work together on, all of the shared goals that we have. Partnerships are another key part of everything that we do, and especially about building community support. It really does take a network of community partners to raise awareness and support all of the people who are experiencing housing instability. And these are certainly all of the partners that we work with. And goal 7, we do have this as a also new goal, which is to advance Housing Catalyst as an employer of choice. It takes a lot of people to do the work that we do, and so making sure that we are a top tier employer is important to us. We made it.
Well done, and great presentation, and I love the last slide with all the different partners, and I'm sure you all have as many partners around yours, and I think it's great for the public to see how many people are really coming together to address this issue. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Housing Catalyst? Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so Estes Park talked about the dedicated funding source through those dollars, through the additional lodging tax dollars. Is Fort Collins or anyone else considering that? I mean, because when we talk about those gaps, you've all talked about the gaps and the limitations you have because of funding. Are folks helping you identify funding? Are there any talks to have a dedicated funding source that might make up some of the gaps?
It is my understanding that the answer is yes. I think the awareness that there is a need for a local dedicated funding source for affordable housing, because basically the sources that we have right now, no matter what all of the adopted goals are, there are not enough resources to get us to the number of units in order to meet the need. So some type of dedicated local source, and there's the resort communities have really been ahead of that. We know Steamboat has adopted it at Estes Park, a lot of the other resort communities who are very behind in meeting the need for their local workforce. So I believe Fort Collins is trying to figure out what that should be and is aware of the need.
Thank you. I just think that it's a nice funding mechanism in that it doesn't tax local residents as much as it taxes visitors. And in communities where we have a big draw of visitors because we live in a beautiful place, we have tons of recreation opportunities, I mean, it seems like it might be an easier sell to a lot of the residents than any other kind of tax.
And I'll just add that in Loveland, there's the same interest in whether it's a tax or another funding stream. You're probably aware in Loveland, tax increases have not fared well in elections at the ballot. However, Loveland City Council, several years ago now, 5-6 years ago, created an affordable housing fund, which is, I think it's 2% of the total tax revenue in Loveland that goes specifically to affordable housing. Much of it does come back to the Housing Authority to backfill for fee waivers, but it is also available to private developers as long as they meet the affordability criteria. So there's been conversations around that specifically and how do we increase funding for it.
Thank you.
Could you tell me the recent homeless task force or something that has been kind of in the news lately? Are someone from your organization or someone who's an affordable housing expert, of course, Matthew's House is on this, but are you involved with that?
And yes, we're involved. We've been involved since really the beginning of those discussions and figuring out what that looks like for Loveland and commissioning studies we've helped underwrite. And I am part of the task force. maybe not quite as active as Housing Catalyst. My board decided several years ago that our role is better to enable somebody like Archdiocesan Housing, and because that's their core business. So when it comes to developing and operating, we're figuring out how to enable companies like that
Yeah.
to help fill that gap. But we're also at the table with the task force, and through Aspire, we have representation at the Larimer County, or Northern Colorado Continuum of Care as well.
Thank you. And I know when I served on the Loveland Human Services Commission for many, many years, there was, we had taken some of, it was through the Human Services, there was, we pushed for, I think the first year was $50,000 for Housing First kind of work. Do you know if that's still happening in Loveland? And I'm assuming, I mean, for all of you, do you have kind of a Housing First kind of bucket just to kind of keep people, but easier to keep them housed than to find them housing, am I correct?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So all of us are part of the Continuum of Care, which is a regional effort to end homelessness. Very much supports the Housing First sort of philosophy about not putting up unnecessary barriers for people experiencing homelessness. So I think we do that in so many different ways. It's not just supportive housing, but it's also, how we screen tenants and how we screen voucher holders, really trying to get to yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm assuming, I'm hoping that, I haven't served since I became commissioner, so of course I had to resign that post, but when I became commissioner, so I'm just curious, I'm hoping that is still kind of happening. Maybe I should just call the city of Loveland.
There's something happening.
Yeah.
I can't speak specifically to $50,000.
No, okay,
But
yeah, okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Colleagues, do you have any other questions? Commissioner Kofalis?
I have various questions, but I would like clarification on when this meeting will end.
Sir, that we were supposed to go till 11:30, and I thought I'd give just a few minutes to go over since we ran late. I do have a hard stop now. I have another meeting that's waiting for me.
So could you clarify, what do you mean by hard stop? 11:35, 11:40?
How about 11:35, sir?
Well, that gives
I
me
didn't-
3 minutes.
I didn't realize as chair, I'm just trying to give, I'm trying to allow for burning desired questions, but I do have,
Of course, I
Yeah.
understand. You don't need to explain that. Then I would like to try to offer these questions and ask that you put them in the proverbial place where people can park bicycles. The first one, if I may, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, perhaps in a follow-up you could provide us with more details about that. I have a recollection of how that used to work, and I think that's a very innovative thing to help people build equity. That's question number one. Similar to the question I posed to Scott regarding the workforce housing deal, I'm curious, Oak 140's been fabulous, what the demographics are for there. Give me a moment, please. Building community support for affordable housing. I'm wondering if there are more specific intentional efforts to address NIMBYism, which is our favorite acronym. And that would apply to all of you folks, and I'm sure you're working on that. Regarding the landlord incentive program, Michelle, thank you. That's interesting. Give me a moment here. Where did I put my question? Yes, and that designation, moving to work, that's kind of interesting. And the various specific things that you're offering to landlords to incentivize. I'm curious how long we've been doing this, and if it's been long enough to show that it's actually making a difference. That's another bicycle parking area. Question, almost there, Madam Chair. Maybe more, there's been reference to Prop 123 and the likelihood or the decision to opt in. I'd like to better understand the relationship with the various housing authorities and what our role in that might be, the county. And also, will Prop 123 actually bear fruit in terms of, filling some of these darn funding gaps that you all have? Because it looks like you have tremendous amount of projects in the pipeline. So will Prop 123 really help with some of these funding gaps? Perhaps what is the role for the county in supporting those efforts? Maybe more information on weatherization, energy efficiency to try to help people keep their, what do you call it, their heating bills down. Just about there. This is an easy one, but there was a reference from Scott about deed restricted buy downs. I don't know what that means, but maybe someday you could enlighten me. I'm curious, are you guys still good with this? I hope you don't mind. What do you see as the future of manufactured, modular, smaller square footage, perhaps tiny homes, the future of that type of housing in terms of addressing our needs? The city of Fort Collins has a affordable housing strategy, and they've identified the gaps. And over the next so many years, we have to get 10,000 units. I'm curious what your take is, and I assume Estes, and it was a good overview of the needs assessment up there, and Loveland has the same thing. I'm curious when they set those goals, how realistic they are, and how we could work, as mightily as possible as a team to try to address those. Finally, I believe, thank you, great examples of partnering with faith communities who have property. I'm wondering if there's any intentional efforts to do an inventory of faith-based community property where the church folks or others might be interested in providing some of that land. And is there an effort to, this is the last one, there's been discussion about can we repurpose buildings that might go for what we're trying to do here. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stevens, did you have some questions for the parking lot? Okay, I will hold mine for later, and I will contact you all with my questions. So thank you. Lori, I see that you have motioned that you'd like to say something.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to say thank you for the good work that you all do, much needed in our community and our county and nationally. And so it was wonderful today to hear what you're doing to address these needs and how you're working so collaboratively with us and with others. And I really appreciate your efforts.
Yes, I was going to say that, my last sentence. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you all know that I was appointed to the Middle Income Housing Authority for the state. So if there's any information you want to pass on to me in that respect, please do so. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And I want to just first off say how grateful I am to see you all here together, and especially with our housing stability manager. To me, I think this signals to the public that you guys work collaboratively, and I know sometimes you mention you're competitive with going after some of these revenue of funding, but I also see a spirit of collaboration that you guys feel, you understand that whatever you each do, it's helping the situation in Northern Colorado overall. And I wanted to say thank you for being here today. Some really great information and great presentation. I'm glad we had that ahead of time and could kind of go through it. You're all doing amazing work. There's beautiful projects. If you looking at those photos, I don't think I saw a bad picture at all. They all look so inviting, and no one would ever, they all look like everything else in our community. And I think that's just a testament to all of your hard work and your board's work and the commitment to just, everyone should have a safe and comfortable place to live. And it's, to me, a human right to have a safe place to sleep at night. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here today. I'm sorry we had some technical challenges at the beginning, and I appreciate you guys racing through there. And I might have some questions, but I'll go ahead and hold those in the interest of time, and just appreciate the work that you do in our communities and appreciate you all being here today. So thank you. So at 11:39, we are adjourned. Thank you.